I don't want to, speaking of causal inference, I don't want to lay blame at your feet necessarily, but I have to say that you are at the cultural epicenter of where all of this panic is happening. So what is it like over there? What's going on at Berkeley and the Bay? And like, is everyone you know freaking out that AGI is just around the corner, or what exactly is happening?
Oh man, that was a lot of things that you just asked me. So first of all, not everyone is freaking out. So I think that's very important. I think the other thing that's very important to remember is that Berkeley has been a epicenter of cult formation for decades. So we are good at it. Look it up. Our history is really good.
Sweet. All right. So we're joined by Professor of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering at UC Berkeley, author of the ArgMin Substack, and a host of some spicy group lunches. From what I hear from the internal UC Berkeley chatter, Ben Recht. So Ben, yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I hope that doesn't get anyone in trouble. You know,
No, it's all good.
They shall remain nameless. Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with you, do you want to just maybe summarize your background briefly and say a bit about what's capturing your attention on your Substack these days and in general?
It's always tricky. I never know how to quite describe myself because I bounce around so much. But I think I've been telling people that I think you could put my work as foundations of machine learning. I'm fine with that. I think that used to mean like foundations were like algorithmic and mathematical and statistical. And I think now and for the past several years, I've been much more interested in like the historical and philosophical and sociological foundations of the field. But so some mix of those 6 things, I think, ties together most of my work. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into your blog. I think that's how we both sort of found you originally. You've been blogging. So I think ArgMin went up a couple years ago, sort of when Substack became popular, but you've been blogging since well before that, since like 2015, 16 sort of deal. Do you have sort of a theory of blogging? Like what are you trying to do? Is it mostly just getting your own thoughts out there? Is it saying things that you can't in academic papers?
I'm a very process-oriented, ritualistic person. I really like habits I like process. Let's just put it that way. I like process is a really interesting way to structure my day. I find it very rewarding. For my theory of blogging, which I started when I started Substacking, and it was kind of a revelation for me, was, when I wake up in the morning, usually I have a cup of coffee, and there's like an hour it takes me to wake up. And, up until a couple of years ago, what would I fill that hour with? Usually like doom scrolling, maybe Wordle, it's like, it wasn't necessarily a very like, I don't know if those activities were necessarily always positive, but whatever, you're drinking coffee, you need some time to wake up. Sure. I just tried an experiment with myself because I've been meaning to get back to blogging. As you guys said, I've been blogging. I used to blog. I've been blogging on and off since maybe about, 2015. And I really like that kind of public facing writing. And I think also with the book I wrote with Moritz Hart, Patterns, Predictions, and Actions, we started to really try to write. There's sections of that book that are really written in this way without equations, that were trying to be a little bit more outward looking. And it was just a fun style. So what I wanted to get more practice at that. And I just decided to try this blogging experiment where first, when I wake up in the morning, that's what I'm going to do. And it's not necessarily going to be all day. I'm going to have to make it limited because I can't spend all of my time writing. Although I've changed my mind on that. But that's what I told myself. That's what I told myself when I started. And I was like, and then, it was crazy at the beginning. I was like, and I'm going to press send at 7:00. I wake up around 6. So I'm going to press send an hour in, and let's just see what happens. And let's see what we can do. Because, I've been on other social media. And, sometimes it's like, I was just thinking, what is this? This is like a Twitter thread, except I'm going to write it in sentences and paragraphs and hit send. And so I tried that experiment. I did it for a week. Then I did it for a month. Then I had a good streak where it was every day. And now it's whatever. It's just something I do. And I really like it. I find it very rewarding.
Do you still hold yourself to the standard of like shipping pretty consistently, or do you do a lot of more editing now? Or
I've stopped beating myself up. So I feel like when it was fresh and it was like no one was reading it, it was like low. It was very low pressure and low key, and it was like there's this there's another fun ritual that comes from this book called The Artist's Way, called morning pages, which is just write what's in your head. And then, and you're not supposed to share that with anybody. It's just kind of like a good way to get your day started. But I was like, what if I shared my morning pages? But now I think because I have a larger readership and I don't want to, it's not like audience capture or anything, but it's just, I don't want to waste people's time. And also I don't want to necessarily have such pressure on myself to be able to come up with some, I don't know. If I don't have something today, maybe I don't have something. It's fine. Yeah, and so I started cutting myself slack. I really didn't want to like subject, everybody who's reading this to total half-baked nonsense. Just mostly half-baked nonsense, I think is where I'm at.
What I was going to say is I imagine the blog gives you an opportunity to like explore certain subjects that wouldn't be appropriate in, say, academic papers or even tweets. And so I'm super curious to hear about what got you interested in philosophy. And so I imagine these two answers are very kind of similar, because maybe the last thing I'll say is during my PhD, I was one of the few freaks who was reading philosophy while I was also trying to publish papers. And my God, it was impossible to get my colleagues at UBC to be interested in philosophy at all. And so that's one of the things I really admire about your blog and your writing, is that you're one of the few profs who care about philosophy. And so I'd just love to hear what got you interested and that.
It's not for everybody. And I wouldn't even necessarily say that everybody should have to feel like they need to read philosophy. I think it can be useful for a lot of people, and I've found it very useful. But like every community, that has its pros and cons. I want to separate two things. I think first of all, with the blogging, it was also one of these things where it's like you can get idea. One of the things that weirds me out about academic culture, and it's just like incredibly crazy, in particular in machine learning, is just the sheer volume at which people think they need to email PDFs to each other. You know what I mean? It's like, so everything has to be these official documents that like have this particular very dry, very like horrible format. And we have to be shipping all the time there. And I didn't, just like with the blog, the shipping all the time for me was about ritual. It was not about product. I don't know, like some like, I need to hit this kind of like, this number of posts or I'm going to be failing. It was really just, it was more about a process and less about a metric. And I feel like science is like that too. Science should be like that like, you should, like, if you were writing archive papers and not posting them, that could still be valuable if you're writing 10 of those a year, I mean, I don't think you have to post all 10. We've convinced ourselves we have to post all 10. And I'm not sure it's healthy. So when Moritz and I were blogging together, and we were writing this book, like part of why Moritz and I started like writing the book in the first place is we had done some co-blogging together before, and we discussed this, is that like blog posts are things that like it's much harder to cite. It kind of lets you have a different kind of, you can do technical things in a blog post that maybe isn't going to be like, people have a hard time figuring out how to format that in APA style or put it into BibTeX. And so now it's like a different kind of, it kind of like separates you out while you're still having that conversation with other people. So I thought that was that was one reason why I'm so drawn to that format. It's very conversational and it's very draft, like first draft. And the philosophy aspect of it, I've always been, in college, I took a few philosophy classes. I was in a Wittgenstein reading group. It's something I like. I like to read. But I think it became a lot more relevant to me, kind of in the wake of some of my own research, which I could explain like this path. It's a funny path.
Please.
So I've been doing machine learning since we don't have to necessarily say whatever. Let's say since 2003 or so. So it's been a long time, and I think machine learning comes with a lot of, like every discipline, comes with a lot of dogma and a lot of artisanry, and dresses it up to make you think that it's rigor. So my group wrote a paper, and I think it was around 2017, where we just wanted to do a reproduction study because we were convinced ourselves that if the dogma is true, then the community had been overfitting on static benchmarks. So, I mean, maybe for your listeners, if not everybody's a machine learning person, machine learning is the progress is driven by a process of benchmarking. You create a data set that is going to be emblematic of a particular prediction problem. Like it could just be a set of images with their labels. It could be a set of questions with their answers. Whatever it is, you collect that data set. You split it into two parts. One of them, you try to build the best algorithm, and then you evaluate how good that algorithm is on the other data set. So the dogma was that the more you look at this data set that's only supposed to be for evaluation and testing, kind of the more you're overfitting to it, and then it won't work well on other data. That you're just like, this is a statistical idea that has, I mean, lots of people still believe. We tested that. And we did not, that dogma did not reflect reality. In fact, what we saw was the methods that had come later and had better accuracy on this testing set, this evaluation set, they were the ones that did better on the new data. And that, I mean, nothing in machine learning. Okay, so maybe machine learning theory people are going to call in and tell you that they had some way of predicting that, but I don't think anybody predicted what we saw. And I didn't predict what we saw. I was shocked.
But what's the limit to that? Like, presumably you're not advocating we no longer have like a train test split, right?
No, I'm advocating that the train test split is much more powerful than we thought it was.
Interesting.
That, in fact, that there's something else going on that's not explained by a lot of the mathematical and statistical arguments that we make in our grad classes and sometimes in our undergraduate classes that doesn't explain what we're seeing. And so that started me down this path. I was like, well, where else can I look? And I started looking at statistics. And then I started getting very frustrated with statistics. And then COVID happened. And I was in the middle of learning all of this like causal inference and epidemiological analysis. And all we got from every day was just terrible stats papers and terrible biomedical papers. And you're just like, what is happening? And so all of a sudden I'm finding myself like kind of engaging with foundations of statistics, philosophical foundations of statistics. And you start to realize that the entire field of statistics is built on very arrogant epistemology. So it's
Nice.
just, I don't know, man. I mean, I wasn't aware. I'll say this: the person who was aware was this guy named David Friedman, who was a faculty at Berkeley, and he has written a lot about it. And he was very grumpy, and so people don't necessarily listen, or like they all say, "Oh yeah, he had great ideas," and then they just go back to what they were doing. And that was what got me started down that path. This was in the middle of 2020, and
that's son of Milton Friedman. David Friedman's the son of Milton Friedman. Is that right? Or no?
No.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's spelled differently. It's a different.
I see. Okay.
That would be cool. I should look that up.
Gotcha. Never mind.
Milton Friedman might have a friend named David. He might have a son named David. I don't know. No, but David Friedman was a statistician at Berkeley. He's been here since the 60s.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. This is excellent. I don't want to pivot to foundations of statistics yet, because I feel like that's going to be a rabbit hole that we're all going to want to spend a lot of time in. But before we get there, I want to go back to the doom scrolling and academia comments and perhaps talk about a subject that is constantly all over Twitter that I can't escape, which is AI doom and superintelligence and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to, speaking of causal inference, I don't want to lay blame at your feet necessarily, but I have to say that you are at the cultural epicenter of where all of this panic is happening. So what is it like over there? What's going on at Berkeley in the Bay? And like, is everyone freaking out that AGI is just around the corner, or what exactly is happening?
Oh man, that was a lot of things that you just asked me. So first of all, not everyone is freaking out. So I think that's very important. I think the other thing that's very important to remember is that Berkeley has been a epicenter of cult formation for decades. So we are good at it. Look it up. Our history is really pretty intense, and we still and so the AGI doom rationalists. I know they have a outpost in the UK, and the other outpost is here. But you know, their big temple, the AI doom temple, is steps away from the Hare Krishna temple. in Berkeley.
Right.
They're like, and which are both like 2 blocks from my house over this way. So I could take us on a tour. So it's like, yeah. I mean, it's wild here. Berkeley's always been a crazy place. So I think that honestly, this is a question that I'm trying to get to the bottom of how did Eliezer Yudkowsky end up in Berkeley in particular? Yeah. Especially he's someone who really prides himself as a autodidact. So why did he come to the college campus? I mean, obviously you have a recruiting pool, but I think it's a little more complicated than that. So, but he's been here since 2003. The machine intelligence research, whatever his thing that was funded by Peter Thiel, was started in 2005 here. The Center for Applied
MIRI
Center for
CFAR,
CFAR. It has the same acronym as the Canadian thing, but it's different. Center for Applied Rationality. They were a little bit later, but that was all here. And now it's pretty clear that there's a huge body of rationalists, X-risk, effective altruism that hubs through Berkeley. And then obviously there's some of that also in San Francisco. It's fascinating. And what I also find fascinating is how that culture created a lot of the language that people use in writing research papers. Like the whole idea of AI safety comes from the Less Wrong forums, which is just insane. And alignment also is something that comes from the Less Wrong forums. And it's kind of infiltrated. We have some very strong proponents on our faculty. And that I find very peculiar as well. I mean, Stuart Russell is here. Jacob Steinhardt is another notable person who has kind of talked about this kind of work before. So it's I'll just say it's interesting. I don't know.
But do you think that there's an obligation for, let's say, the non-doomer technical AI researchers to speak out and do some more public outreach as you've been doing? Because like I've been saying that there's very much two giant camps within the AI research community. I've been using, say, the Jeff Hinton lineage versus the Mike Jordan lineage as a shorthand. But it seems like only the Hinton lineage is doing a lot of public outreach and talking to the media, and there's very few people like the Gary Marcuses and the Melanie Mitchell. I would give another name, but it seems like the other group is not as represented publicly as perhaps it should be. Yeah,
I think it's interesting that like Melanie and Gary are not from Mike's lineage.
Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah, good point.
But it's just worth pointing out, right? I mean, it's like it is. Wasn't Melanie was a
she was Hofstadter. I think Hofstadter.
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. Hofstadter student, right? And Mike has been very outspoken about this stuff for himself. We'll give him credit. He does have. I think it's just hard to latch onto a counter narrative. The AGI narrative is very clean. What's the counter? This is actually always a problem of being a critic. Yeah. Like every time you like, and I encounter this a lot. Every time you're like, "Hey guys, this is fucked up," they're always like, "Well, what's the alternative?" You're like, okay, we could point out, I think there's a place for critique and there's a place for identifying issues without necessarily having an alternative, but you're more powerful if you have it.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that's tricky. And I think that this is also the thing that's so complicated with the current AI debate is that like it really got, so the people at OpenAI and all these other folks we've been talking about have been talking about superintelligence for a decade. But for a while, superintelligence was like playing Atari or beating Go. Or it was, they would never, they've been claiming they're working on superintelligence for a decade. And then all of a sudden, they were the first to release ChatGPT, even though Google had a just as good, well-performing model. But the thing that Sam and Greg Brockman have been masters of is putting on shows. So they put it on a show that hit the jackpot. And again, like if you have billions and billions of dollars, you can afford to try really risky things. And if one hits, you have trillions of dollars. I don't know. It's a crazy place to be in Silicon Valley. And so, that ChatGPT thing hit. They were wrong about superintelligence up until this thing. And now we're supposed to give them credence about being right. Obviously, the way the last 3 years have played out, I think that the extra wave has crested. I think most people, now that they use it all the time, I mean, not here, but everywhere else in the world. I think that everybody uses these all the time, and like the main applications just aren't that scary. It's like it, and once you become this happens all the time with computing technologies. Is once it's always terrifying. They're going to automate away jobs, or they're going to become. That story of superintelligence is older than any of the technology associated with it. Yeah. The word, you guys know this probably, but I'll bring it up again. The word robot comes from a play about a bunch of automatons that come to life and try to kill us. You guys didn't know this? Okay.
No, that's great. That's a great factoid. Yeah. Nice.
It's a Czech play. It's called Rossum's Universal Robotics. And it's about people build these machines to do labor, and then they become sentient and kill all the humans. That's from the 20s, and that's where the word comes from.
In the 20s.
Yeah, that's where the word comes from.
So when we're talking about this, we tend to lay some of the faults of this hype with like a certain style of probabilistic reasoning, which has sort of taken over like the AI rationality space, and that's the style of reasoning where you always talk in terms of probabilities, you put probabilities on everything, and then you start doing these expected value calculations. You have written about this in the context, especially of Nate Silver's book. And he's obviously one big proponent of this style of reasoning. I would say your critique of his book focused on not sort of the downstream decision-making and AI consequences. It was more about like what sort of behaviors are we sort of are these sort of attitudes promoting in the world. But I guess, do you share our concern that like this style of reasoning is what's leading to a lot of the AI doom rhetoric, or would you place the blame sort of like somewhere else?
That's a great question. I'll first say that the Nate Silver book, which does talk a little bit about AI doom, is predominantly about gambling, which is why when Leif Weatherby and I wrote that review, we were so focused on the gambling, because I also think that is a pernicious problem that is leading to a lot of these bad downstream effects. I think the gambling and everything is going to come back to bite all of us.
Sam Bankman-Fried. It's like it's already happened in one sense.
Already happened there, yeah. But now we have all these other letting people trade 0-day options on their phone is not a good idea. It's obvious. Right. But so anyway, this is neither. We don't have to necessarily get into that so much. Let me go back to your other question about the kind of Bayesian reasoning. I brought his name up, Leif Weatherby. Leif Weatherby 100% agrees with you guys, and I think his next book project is going to probably be about that. Which I'm looking forward to hearing more about what he wants to write. But I feel like it's a bit mixed. I think partially it's I do find the people who take Bayesian confirmation theory too seriously to be very weird, and they're weird. They're weird whether they're in philosophy, computer science, or on the less wrong forums. So it is a little bit of a goofy, popular thing. But like the thing that's so funny is it's not. So okay, maybe I can just say this in two ways. Most people don't take it seriously, but I guess Ben, your question is like, is that the problem? The people who do take it seriously, is that kind of part of what the problem we're in? Is that kind of the question?
I don't want to say that that's the only thing that's going on, but I think that sort of reasoning does make it easy to take very far-flung scenarios that you might otherwise be tempted to just say, oh, this is very unlikely. If you really adopt a style of reasoning, there's this tendency to say, well, now I have to put a number on it, and I have to now I have to factor it into my expected value calculation. I have to consider how many people might die, even if it's the super far-flung scenario.
That's right.
And, Vade and I have harped on and on about this. And that just gives life to something that you might otherwise sort of just push aside because it seems very unlikely. And it makes it hard to counter it. Like if you buy into this mode of rationality, it becomes this meme in your head and you can't really get rid of it. And you're just like, well, I guess I have to think about this problem now because the numbers tell me I have to, sort of thing.
It's so weird because I would even be willing to grant people that sure, we could put numbers on these things if it makes you feel better, as long as you don't multiply them by other numbers and add them up. We'll be fine, right?
Not all numbers are the same here.
Exactly. That's like that the expected values maybe are the problem, not the probabilities. I think that I don't know if that's true either. I think that the need to hyper quantify everything and somehow that the quantification and datafication of something makes it more real than if it does. If you don't have that, is pernicious. I think you could draw the line. I mean, I think the thing that's so funny is that there's partially the one thing that you didn't mention that I think is 100% to blame is the optimization side of it. Because even if you were just multiplying these expected values, if you didn't compare them to each other and declare the higher one being better, we also wouldn't have a problem. And so it really is just this issue that's like you have probabilistic forecasting. You have this need to be able to quantify the value of all outcomes, which is also a little weird. And then it's really just about like, why do we then have to, why do you think that everything can be cast in utilitarian language? The thing that I don't understand, and like, I think people have just come back to this, like Bentham, I think he was a big thinker and he was an interesting guy, but I just feel like I don't know how you can look at anybody's reading of utilitarianism in the past 50 years and come away with that there's anything other than like it just reveals grotesqueness in the way that we think about optimization, that thinking about optimization is itself grotesque. That's my takeaway from utilitarianism. The fact that like it's so easy to play these games and they give you absurd answers, it clearly means that this can't be the way that we run our lives or our ethics. But that's my takeaway. I don't know. That's how I read Peter Singer.
It's kind of like magical realism applied to mathematics, because you can just make up whatever scenarios you want and then make it rigorous in this very pseudo mathematical way, such that like you're so just arguing about the minutia of these equations that no one is just stepping back and thinking like, is this even possible? Like, can we predict the fucking future 1,000 years from now, like the long-termists do? Well, like there's no room to even ask those questions when you're arguing about if you should sum or integrate over these made-up numbers that you've just popped out of your head, And so that it's just playing tennis without a net in some sense, because there's no data to constrain you by.
But I think what you said there is interesting, because it's the same kind of people. Like I can't imagine. What if you went to the Less Wrong forum and you said, "All right, there's a town where a barber shaves every man who doesn't shave himself. So who shaves the barber?" And I feel like. Isn't that the Rocco Basculus? That's the same thing, right? Like, I don't understand. What are we doing, guys? Just chill.
Yeah.
Yes,
language has paradoxes in it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's great.
Part of what's going on is that there's a certain personality type, and presumably we would fall close to the epicenter here, where it's like people like math nerds, which presumably we all are. We like these neat, coherent systems that we can argue about and that are clean to articulate and you can get clean answers out of. And then there's like this step where people just want to take this sort of reasoning and apply it to the very messy real world. And I think there's some people who look at the sorts of paradoxes you get from trying to do that, and they'll just say, well, clearly this isn't the answer. And then there's another kind of person that looks at those same paradoxes and recognizes their issues, but then just says, these are like problems to work on. This doesn't say that trying to mathematize the world is the wrong thing to do. This just says that like, we have to figure out what the right mathematization is. And that's an interesting, I don't know if that's just a psychological difference in like a predisposition to want to categorize the world, or like what exactly is going on there. But it's a very different way to approach the problem.
I think it's just, it points to the danger of spending too much time on the internet. Like if you're doing this in person, everybody would just chill out eventually. I think that's also the same endpoint there. My own personal take, and I think this is a I mean, it's true. This isn't even my personal take. It's just obvious. All of this mathematics that we have for automated decision making works in narrow contexts. It's like in the small world setting that like Leonard Savage likes to talk about.
Yes,
the small world setting, and the really hard part when you're doing the engineering is forcing the system to always be in the small world.
Yes.
And that's how you get all these successful engineering scalings. So, for example, like air traffic, the thing that's amazing about air traffic is that planes do not fly close to each other. This is why whatever we call it, autopilot. It is called autopilot. Yeah. Elon Musk has ruined my brain. Autopilot of airplanes. Autopilot of airplanes is much easier than autopilot of cars. There's just nothing around. And also, if something goes wrong, you have a long time before the ground gets you. So to fix the problem.
Yeah.
So true. And we work really hard to engineer the system. So that's true. So planes don't fly through thunderstorms. Planes don't fly close to each other. Planes, and we have to deal with the difficult traffic and scheduling on the ground with air traffic control. So we engineer the system so it works with our engineering models. And I think the fact that people don't, I almost wonder, like, on the people who argue about these things, just have never actually coded up an optimization problem and then tried to apply it to something.
That's 100% true. That's 100% true. Yes. Yeah. To them, optimization is just like whatever evolution does, which is very different than like Boyd and Vandenberg, right? And so
I think that could be part of it.
The terminology, I think it's quite confusing in that sense as well. Yeah.
I mean, I'll shamelessly plug my new book, which unfortunately isn't out until 2026. But
please,
I spent a lot of time talking about. I didn't use this language of small worlds because Max Roginski had not sent me this really nice this part of Leonard Savage where he really kind of goes through this. But I called them sweet spots instead. I feel like that's really the key with a lot of these technologies is that all of our optimizations, statistics, all of our automated decision-making technologies have really powerful sweet spots where they're incredible. And we just got to know where they are. And so there are certain things you can optimize, like packing transistors onto silicon. That's very optimizable. And we've seen 80 years of progress of that. It's just insane, right? Mm-hmm. And I think air traffic is one thing that's kind of optimizable. I think there's a lot of machine learning is very optimizable. We can find these narrow cases where, the text thing is just astounding that's optimizable. And the technology that comes out of that is astounding. So, but then a lot of things aren't. I think one of the wackier parts of it is that once we built all of this technology, we thought we should work that way. We should all work the way that we built these computers. And I just don't think that we don't work that way. And I think every time, one of my favorite anecdotes I have in the book is if you look at chess, there were immediately two camps at the beginning of computer chess. There were the people who thought we should talk to grandmasters and try to understand how they play. And interesting stuff came out of that. This is Herb Simon and Alan Newell has a bunch of really cool. They have a whole book called Human Problem Solving, where they try to figure out how people do these things. And then there's Shannon's approach, which is just we're just going to do a tree search.
Right.
Computers are really good at the tree search. It worked really well. I would say, with regards to building programs to play chess, that Newell and Simon line of thinking didn't really go anywhere. But with trying to understand just the complexity of human decision making is incredibly important work, and just the sophistication of what it is that people do is very different than what computers do. And I feel like we just the weird turn that we did as computers got faster, much faster than we can get smarter, is we're well, maybe we should be like them.
So is this, so your book, from what I understand, is called The Irrational Decision, right? And is this sort of the centerpiece that we made this decision to try and design our lives in some sense around what's easily optimizable in computer land? And that's led us astray in various ways.
Yeah, it's kind of that's the theme, but the majority of the book is kind of explaining the history of the building of these computers and where they fall short. Most of it's just, it's they're not, I feel again, in their sweet spots, they're incredible. And everywhere else, it could be a mess. One of the chapters is about game theory. And I feel if you look at game theory as a way to understand how humans interact with each other, it's a complete failure. It's an absolute, didn't do anything. It's been, but if you think about it this is a prototype for solving games, parlor games. The original, it's very funny how the original von Neumann paper, in 1928, where he proves the minimax theorem for the first time and establishes the first time he doesn't say it in words, but how he talks about zero-sum games for the first time. That paper is called A Theory of Parlor Games. And then the book that comes out with Morgenstern, that's supposed to be the foundations of all economic behavior, is called A Theory of Games.
Right.
So we dropped the parlor part.
That was important, though.
Yeah, no, but I think that was the problem they solved. All of the examples in von Neumann and Morgenstern are parlor games.
Well, so too with the probability calculus itself, right? It was first invented to analyze games of chance, right?
That's right.
And card games and coin flips and stuff. Right. And then people like Silver then just want to broadcast that and say apply it to everything in your goddamn life. And
that's right.
And so something I'm interested in is actually a comment you made earlier, which is that a lot of these tools, like optimization tools, just don't apply in certain circumstances. What I think is interesting about that is that when you're a researcher and you're trying to figure out how to get these stupid systems to work, you develop a lot of intuition about where the tools can be applied, where the tools can't be applied. Like the job of the researcher very often is just curating the problem and getting rid of the problems that are just intractable. But then what we're doing is we're producing these tools for the general public, and we're telling the general public that these are general tools. They're all-purpose tools. They can be used in 1,000 different circumstances. And so I'm curious how you would kind of convey intuition to the general public about the limits of these tools. Like take optimization, for example. Like what are some heuristics that you have when you consider, should I use optimization on this problem, such that you say, no, this is not appropriate to use optimization here? And how can we convey that intuition to the general public so that they know that all these general tools have limitations, and us researchers know that, but we don't convey that very easily to the public, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. Optimization in particular is a great question because it's so easy to talk about, things being better.
Yeah, exactly.
Like improvement seems like such a tractable thing. If I play guitar more, I get better at it. If I write more, I get better at it. Is that optimization? Is this like general process of betterment optimization? Some optimizers might say so, right? But it's not what we do in mathematical optimization, where you really cleanly specify what is your objective, what are your constraints, what counts as the policy.
What can happen even.
What can happen.
Well
exactly.
defined.
Everything has to be well defined. So they're just so different. And you just can't write math equations down about me.
Exactly.
Even in the weirdest settings, like one of my favorite examples that I use to illustrate that is like the first example in every linear programming class is called the diet problem. And the diet problem is you want to minimize the cost of feeding someone. Let's say you have to feed a football team. They eat a lot. So you want to minimize the cost of feeding the football team, but you want to make sure they get a certain amount of calories, a certain amount of protein, and a certain amount of, whatever other nutrients, right? So you could just write that whole thing down. It's a really beautiful linear program because if you increase the amount of food, the calorie just goes up linearly. And if you increase, and same with all the other nutrients, and same with cost, everything is kind of proportional to amount. So it's just this beautiful, simple linear program. It's a really easy way to engage undergrads in what a linear program is. And it turns out it was the first linear program that George Dantzig ever solved. The first real linear program they ever solved. But it came from this fight. Like the origin of that story is it comes from this fight between a rather right-wing economist named George Stigler and the USDA, because the USDA was putting out these guidelines during the Depression about how to have a minimum cost diet. And Stigler was like, what does that mean? Let me try to find it. And he proposed this diet problem. And like his optimal diet is like wheat and beans and liver every once in a while. And that was it. So that was like, that's what comes out as minimum cost. And you're like, it's grotesque.
Let them eat slop.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We'll have bean pies.
Exactly.
And you can't afford salt. That doesn't go in there because it wasn't on our ingredient list. So it's so like, it's so weird, right? I mean, and it's kind of obvious if you've ever, I know you both have worked on optimization before, right? You push up against the Pareto frontier and it's always weird solutions out there. Yeah. Like the optimal things are necessarily neglecting everything else you didn't think about. If you didn't model it, we're not thinking about it. So if you didn't put in palatability, if you didn't put in, I don't even know, how would we quantify, like, I'd like to sit down with my family and chat over this.
Quality of the conversation over the dinner table.
Yeah.
Kind of things. Yeah. You can't put that in equations. Yeah.
Or that I like this particular thing and would like to eat it every once in a while, right? But how do you put that in? I mean, yeah, someone could say maybe you could, but the complexity just grows so quickly. Even if you just think about dumb things, I think you can explain this to people. Like, if you think about the simplest optimization problem, probably even simpler, the diet problem is pretty simple, but another one that feels more mathematical is just finding the shortest path from A to B, like literal shortest path. Yeah. And so now if I wanted to find the shortest path to San Francisco, it would probably be just a straight line. But you have to use roads. Okay, that's a different one. And then you're like, well, actually, I don't really care about distance. I care about speed. So that's a little more complicated. Now I have to bring in all these elements of when traffic or what the traffic is. And then you say, and it really matters what time of day I'm talking about. And that, you know what I mean? And so just like the actualities of an optimization problem become so overwhelmingly complex so quickly.
the USSR tried to run an economy like this using various forms of linear programming, and it didn't work out so well.
It didn't pan out. Yeah. No, I think that's always tricky. I think a lot of people like those kind of trying to use different kinds of systems thinking and optimization to plan economies. I also think is, I don't know. I don't think we have a lot of good success stories that came out of that.
All right, so let's pivot to statistics and your series on Paul Meehl, and this will bog us down for sure.
That's fine.
So maybe for the audience, just say a bit who Paul Meehl was, and also how you found him.
So I was teaching a class with Shamik Dasgupta on the philosophy of automated decision making, and we were putting together our reading list. And I think even before that, I had gone into. Maybe I should step back. It's actually happened before this class with Shamik. I think the first thing that started happening is I was reading, I got introduced to Friedman, and I was kind of going through his work. And the other name that kind of kept coming up in the sphere of people who were strongly critiquing statistical practice and a lot of the philosophical foundations was Paul Meehl. And he has a very famous paper, which I think has come across a lot of people's desks, called... oh man, now I'm blocking on the name.
Is this the paradox one?
No, it's like structural risks and tabular asterisk.
Yeah. Tabular asterisk. Yeah.
The tabular asterisk parts are we'll remember because that's for people who don't know. When you're in a lot of social sciences, including economics, rather than writing down the p-value, you add an asterisk to any number that tests statistically significant. So, and so I'd read that, and it's like Meehl, who I'll describe in a minute, is one of my favorite writers, and yet I hate his writing. I really do not. I find his writing to be very slog-filled every time I approach it, but I always come away happy, even if I made it through. So I gone through this paper. I was thinking about trying to figure out how to incorporate it into this class with Shamik. I happened to be talking to Moritz Hart, who I've brought up before, and Moritz is like, he has his whole course online. Somebody posted a whole course of his online, and once I started watching that, I liked him so much more. I was like, okay, I'll start watching it. So I started watching it, and it was amazing. And I think in prepping for the class, and because I had been doing blogs, and because this was so related to the topics of the class, then I was like, what if I just tried to, in the previous semester, I had live blogged my own class. And I just blogged a little bit about every lecture. And this time I was like, what if I just blogged someone else's class?
Yeah, nice.
And I tried to do his. I should do that again. I should find some other class to blog again. But yeah, so who's Paul Meehl is, let me just describe a little bit about who he is, right? He was a professor of, I think psychology, but he was also a psychiatrist. He was the president of the American Psychological Association. He was also one of the founding members of the Minnesota Center for the Philosophy of Science, which has some of the really top philosophers of science who were coming through there at all times. So he knew a lot of the people anyone who's dabbled in philosophy of science has met at one time or another. He definitely knew people like Paul Feyerabend and Imre Lakatos. He knew them well. Mm-hmm. And so, it's kind of awesome. I feel like as an academic, I look up to these people who are able to do so many interesting things. And I feel like sometimes professors think that they can't do that anymore. And I don't think that's true. I feel like you just have to want it. So anyway, so I very interesting guy in that regard. And he's done incredibly important and interesting things. I don't think anybody appreciates. Well, I think people do. Sorry, not say anybody. I don't think enough people appreciate how many things he's contributed to our thinking about the practical philosophy of science and the practical application of statistics. So just to list a few things that he's done. He has this incredibly important book from 1954 called Clinical versus Statistical Prediction, where he's one of the first people to really point out that statistical rules are often far better than the intuitions of clinicians when it comes to predicting the outcomes of actions on individuals and trying to explain why. He was one of the first people to really take on null hypothesis testing. He has written some of the most incisive and influential commentary on why it's just one of the fastest ways to kill a field is to make it standard. I think so he's really famous for that. He invented a notion of what's called construct validity, which is really important in psychology and has kind of bled out more broadly into the social sciences, which really tries to attack what measurements mean in the social science. So if you do a test of a person where you ask them questions, what exactly can we infer from the score of that test? What does a psychometric test mean? What is the construct around that? What is the meaning of even an IQ test or these things? So I think those are just a few of the things that this guy did, and he taught a whole class. A lot of it. This was the class that was online was his last course before he retired, which is awesome.
One of the things I loved about his lecture is he just has little anecdotes about the people he worked with, and one of them of Lakatos is like, is the only person I've worked with who's had people shot, and I just thought that was so hilarious. And just little, it's crazy.
And I think that was actually helpful to listen to Meehl. I don't think I appreciated that period of philosophy to the same way before he talked about it. I think because for me, logical positivism is such a stodgy and weird way to look at the world. But I think at the time it was incredibly bold and revolutionary, and it was coming from a very European revolutionary spirit in Vienna, in the 20s. So it's really interesting to kind of put it in history as to when this was happening and what the historical context was. And the lectures do a lot of that. It's great. Yeah.
So my sense of you is that you went into the course with some skepticism of statistics and a lot of statistical methodology that is used, but that you came out of it very much skeptical of almost all of statistics.
All of it. Yeah.
And so is that right? Would you say it just made you even more skeptical of the entire field and how we're doing things?
I would say that my position now is not that necessarily it's not really a skepticism of statistics, which I think would just be silly because that's tabulation of complex facts into smaller counts. I don't think that we need to attribute that to Ketlet. We've been doing that since the Sumerians, the early Sumerian tablets. That's what they're doing too. So I feel like those kinds of things are around, and it's really about how we think about what the role is. And for me, what has been really helpful in working through a lot of different philosophers, not just Meehl, but also a lot of different statisticians. It's interesting that a lot of statisticians are very philosophical and have very interesting things to say about their field. To me, I've just come out the other side. I feel like we should just have a bit of a, I don't know what the right way to say this is. I don't want to necessarily think utilitarian, but certainly use-centric philosophy.
Instrumentalist.
Maybe instrumentalist. So in my opinion, I think I certainly am skeptical of statistical inference as a broad field. I think that that's a field of statistics. They mean a very particular thing by inference. I think almost all of it is not justifiable on the merits. However, I think that a lot of the tools in statistics are still very powerful and should be, and I'd advocate for using them. So I've actually not, I start writing my own things. So for example, I wrote a paper called A Bureaucratic Theory of Statistics, which I think is a good justification for the randomized trial. I'm finishing a review of Meehl's clinical versus statistical prediction, because I think it actually makes a very strong case for why statistical prediction matters and is important, and is similarly justifies most of what we do in machine learning. But we have to realize, again, why that's limited. I think it's very easy for me to tell you why. It's one of these weird things where people are puzzled by Meehl's findings that statistics is always better than clinicians because we feel like human judgment is so good. But there's a simple answer to the puzzle of why it's happening. It's because the evaluation is a trick. How do we evaluate how somebody's decision-making capabilities? We look at a bunch of cases and then evaluate their average. How many patients did this doctor kill out of N? Out of N, right? So if we're making predictions, we're trying to predict how well this cohort is going to do in the university, we look at their average. We don't just look at all the individual case studies. And then we just compare them and say, look, this one had a higher accuracy than this one. But if all you're looking at is statistical accuracy, statistics wins. We know what the optimal way to solve this is. And you can even you can use this very sus math to write down the answer. And you'll almost always see that, I look at the group that, I stratify things into group. groups, and I look at the frequency of occurrences in each of the groups, and that's my prediction for every group. It's not bad. I mean, what else are you going to do? Like, if you saw all the data in advance, that would be the optimal answer.
But it seems like some of these metrics are still important, right? Like, it seems like the metric of how many people we're killing on average, it seems like an important metric to optimize for.
But you have to say, we have to assert this, and we have to say why. And if our metrics are going to be these kind of average cases, then it is important. And we also have to realize that they're also not everything can be easily summed up. Like, this is coming back to our earlier optimization question. There are a lot of decision-making problems that can't be easily evaluated on a single axis. And at that point, you can't compare this. I mean, how do you compare the statistical prediction to the clinical prediction? And there's a lot of cases where those decisions in the actual clinical setting aren't really boxable into being like the ones that were before, and that maybe now we need discretion. And I think one of the interesting things that we see about a lot of these bureaucratic things is that they are setting up rules to take away discretion from individuals. And so the question is just always, like, sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not good. And we have to, again, like you're saying, Ben, sometimes the metrics matter, in which case we go to the best method. But like, let's be clear that it's the metric that's defining the best method. And let's make sure that's the metric we care about.
Nice. So let's actually just dive into your bureaucratic theory of statistics, because I agree with half of it, and then I'm a bit confused about the second half.
That's fine.
So you draw a distinction between two different uses of statistics.
Yeah.
One you call ex ante policy. Yeah. And you summarize this as this is the specification of rules by some regulatory body that governs acceptable future actions.
That's right.
So, we have some, the FDA sets standards about what we want clean food to look like, or, how effective we want a medicine to be in a clinical trial before we release it onto the market or something. And these are transparent rules that we can all agree to. Then statistics does a good job, if we all agree to them by some process, then statistics does a good job of letting us speak a common language when evaluating various different possible future actions. And so it plays like a very important regulatory role in this case. Yeah. You contrast this to ex post inference, which is, I think, what most people would consider statistics to be doing most of the time, which is actually drawing conclusions about scientific theories or, parameters in scientific models or something. So telling us something about the actual verisimilitude of a theory on the ground. And maybe in the back of our heads here, we can just have something like the Higgs boson example, which I know you take issue with, which we'll get to, right? But we
if I can just interject with just another example, I think Higgs boson is a little bit detached from people's real world experience, but just this is how we have learned that if you put lead in gasoline, it can affect, say, the average IQ of the population in that county. And so there's some relationship between leaded gasoline and some outcome. Maybe Ben, you dispute this, and I'd love to hear.
Yeah, that one's tricky. We could just go smoking causes cancer. Let's go with the actual one that everybody goes to, right?
For sure.
Smoking causes cancer. And how we drew that inference, right?
So just an example, just for the audience.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's a better example than Higgs boson.
It's the best example, man. That's and the problem with that is it's the exception that proves the rule. Unfortunately, for me, I feel like so few things are as cut and dry as smoking causing cancer. And even smoking causing cancer, I'll be honest, the data is not as strong as some of the other bad parts about smoking. I mean, it's there, and I'm not going to quibble about it, and I don't. It's clear that a lot of people who smoke get cancer, but the thing is, if you smoke, you also with much higher probability get chronic lung disease and can't breathe. Emphysema is in your future if you smoke. It's just to point out the causal link between smoking and emphysema way stronger than the causal link between smoking and cancer.
But wouldn't that have been ascertained via the same statistical methods that you're imputing?
Well, I just for some reason why is cancer scarier than emphysema?
Probably more people know what cancer is my guess, to be honest.
I don't think it's a little complicated. You should go. I mean, I think cancer, the war on cancer brought a lot of public. Anyway, the history of cancer is fascinating. We don't have to dwell too much on that. It's hard to get these examples. A good blog post. But I think there's this great book, The Emperor of All Maladies. Everybody should read that book. Such anyway. So I don't have to write anything about cancer because who cares? He covered everything.
I might have muddied your question, Ben, by interjecting there.
No, but I understand your question, Ben. I mean, I think I'm one of these guys who thinks it's fine. I think when you look at so much of what I've learned from philosophy of science, and I think it's very important, is that someone with a concerted, like some kind of vested interest in not believing something is not going to have their mind changed. And we are going to fight petty fights. And this is why people love to say that like progress in academia occurs one funeral at a time. At some point, it's just like some people just stay on something for a really long time, and it's really hard to move them off that without having some kind of push. So I think once you start to look at how science actually happens, and you read people like we've been discussing, like Lakatos or Feyerabend, who were as much social scientists as they were. I mean, they were a little bit of armchair social scientists, but they're writing about social things rather than some logical reconstruction. Same with Kuhn. These guys are not really analytic philosophers, right? I mean, they're making a very different argument. And I think so for me, it was eye-opening, and the Meehl stuff helped me at least dig through this literature more. Although I've been reading a lot of science studies before that. You just know that this is such a social thing, and that these belief systems are so like rooted in, like, nobody Bayesian updates. It's just not a thing that anybody does. Like, certainly people change their minds, but like the mechanism under which that happens is, it's not a simple rule. And so once you say that, then you're like, well, it's okay. So what is the Bayesian update? Like, what are we doing there exactly? And why should we think, in order to have a Bayesian update, you need to define some kind of, you have to believe in a very particular model. You have to believe the world is probabilistic. You have to believe in this prior thing, right? You have to believe in the likelihood model. This is one of these funny things with Bayesianism. People spend all this time complaining about the prior, and nobody bothers to ask, like, why do we believe these likelihoods? Sorry, the posterior is the next thing, right? But why do we believe these likelihoods? I don't know. It's a model. They're all models. And you can construct a calculus under which you get things out of this model, but then why should I believe your model? And so I think this is the thing where it just becomes such a bit of a mess. And I think that the thing that happens is that statisticians like to argue about their mathematical epistemology, and then out in practice, what is the null hypothesis significance test? The hell is it? Nobody, like you. I mean, Ben knows. I know that Ben knows it very well. Like, knows it inside and out, and has all these beautiful generalizations of it. But ask any practicing psychologist, or we just know for like 50 years, nobody really knows what a p-value is or means, or they don't want to know, and they don't want to think about it. They just want a rule to get their paper published.
So I guess my question is, are you advocating that ex-ante policy is the only role for statistics and we should completely forget about ex-post inference? Or are you just saying that in addition to ex-post inference, we should think much harder about ex-ante policy?
So I am personally not wedded to, I'm not telling anybody what to do necessarily, or let's just put it this way. I wouldn't tell anybody to abandon the thing that they're passionate about, but I certainly think that from a explaining statistics to people point of view, trying to explain the difference between frequentism and Bayesianism and what a p-value is very confusing. Explaining what a correlation is and explaining the stories behind why randomization is helpful and why we're going to do that as our policy, I think is easier. And moreover, I think it's very interesting that the statisticians focus so heavily on the p-values in randomized trials, when the history of randomized trials showed that those had nothing to do with why they were adopted. Which is, I talk a little bit about it in that paper. I talk a lot more about it in my book, because I think that there's, I just think we don't appreciate that the randomization. What's important about the randomization is the removal of the bias and kind of like the initialization of the start time. And then, sure, you get an effect size measurement for free, but if you need to be squinting at the effect size measurement, whatever, it's a marginal case, and which is why I think that the 0.05 it's a floor. Obviously, we'd like something more than that, but we set some regulatory floor to prevent poison from going on the market.
But it seems like if you were to really drill down on why we have certain standards around like which statistical tests we're going to use to judge vaccines, for example. At some point, isn't that going to cash out in terms of something like, well, we think we're getting something like the true effect here, right? Like, in terms of like why P0.05 or like why are we using frequentist hypothesis testing instead of another method, or like why are we doing hypothesis testing at all? Why are we using this tool instead of that tool? At some point, that argument's got to bottom out in like, well, it's better. Why is it better? It's better at inferring, not perfectly, of course, because as you said, these are all models, but it's like gets us closer to truth than other things fairly reliably. And isn't that how we're going to set the standards in the first place?
It's interesting because I've been trying to find a clear-cut example of like that actually happening. Because my impression, let me say this first of all, the medicine is this fascinating social science. It's like the only human-facing science we have where you are regularly finding 5 sigma interventions. Like and what's the P when you're at a 5 sigma level? It's like what 0.00 whatever. It's like 10 to the minus 6. It's real. It's zero. It's zero. So, and you guys are like, okay, what's the 5 sigma intervention? The COVID vaccine. What was the P value in that the Moderna study or the Pfizer study? I mean, the Z score was like 12 in the Moderna study, or maybe 13, and they stopped early. I mean, that's crazy. Z-score 13, you're like, okay, I'm done. And there's other things like that. We have this all the time. There are all these cancer therapeutics that have this kind of curative ability. There are, surgeries we know have this property. I think you just start thinking through in medicine, like so many things have like a co-ND of 1. I mean, they're just huge examples. Even think about like hard drugs. Like, what's the p-value of whether or not heroin is going to get you high? 0. So I think that's the kind of thing where if you look, my favorite story is that penicillin was first used as a human therapeutic during World War II. And the first paper on penicillin, which won a Nobel Prize, is 10 case studies. And they're insane case studies. They're like, we give the guy the drug and we watch the infection recede. And then we ran out of the drug and the infection comes back in the opposite direction. Man, it's like you're just physically seeing it happen before you, and the counterfactual is impossible. The first randomized control trial is 1946. It's also on an antibiotic, and it was on an antibiotic treatment of tuberculosis, and it didn't work that well. And that's why they had to do the RCT to decide whether or not it was worth using. And in the end, they kind of just gave up on it, even though it passed the RCT. So, and there the Z-score was 3. So I think it is this weird, interesting question of like, what are we can learn stuff when those counterfactuals are impossible. And I think the randomization can give us more certainty. Like another great example is the Salk trial. Oh man, with polio vaccine, excuse me. and there again, the Z-score, there was like 400 children that were randomized. And the Z-score was like 7 or 8.
But it seems like there's maybe the difference between the way that I think about statistics and you. Let's take the vaccine Moderna case with a Z-score of 12, which is insane. Like, it's not that the Z-score of 12 tells us that it works. It's the underlying theory of like the germ theory of disease plus what we know about biology and about vaccines, such that if we didn't see that, we would falsify that theory, right? It's the statistics is an attempt to falsify what we know about vaccines, and getting that high Z-score just means, okay, our theory has yet to be falsified. Whereas I think in your critique of the Higgs boson, you were talking about it as if like, well, why did we think the Higgs boson exists? Because there's a little bump in this little chart over here. No, it's not because there's a little freaking bump in the chart. It's because of the standard model. And if we didn't see that bump, then the standard model would be falsified. So it's using statistics as an attempt at falsifying, and failing to see that, we have more confidence in the underlying theory that led to the statistical test in the first place. Yeah. Whereas I think you're taking more of a verificationist or confirmatory approach, which is that just seeing the bump means we can just say with confidence that the effect is there. Yeah, whereas it's the theory, it's a theory that says that the effect is there, not the statistics.
I would separate the two, because I just feel like there are so many theories that go into the Higgs boson. It's very complicated, and physicists just get mad at me. I fight with them today. I don't care. Yeah. It's not really important to make the philosophical point. They can. I just feel like, as long they're going to hear from me when they start. I mean, I know CERN is trying to lobby for some new exorbitant super collider, and I think I would be happy to speak out against that. But I think, but let me not pick on particle physics. I think that the medicine stuff I think is already interesting enough. I just think that the randomized trials we say now exist because of epistemological reasons, but they were made a policy because the government needed a regulatory tool to figure out which drugs to put on the market. That's why they were adopted. I mean, this was true with the Salk vaccine. The FDA was like mandated in the 30s to find some means of proving that drugs were not poison.
But companies would A/B test whether or not there's policy telling them to, right? An A/B test, you try to randomize your users. If you're Facebook, you try to do a good randomization with regards to different, say, like UI layouts or whatever, right? And they're not doing that because the government tells you have to randomize. They're doing it because that's an effective way to figure out what actually will result in more clicks.
I would argue they do that. Well, I don't think anybody seriously A/B tests themselves in a circle anymore. That was trendy a little bit at Google for a while, and they realized that they just start to, because these effects are so ephemeral. You know, your user base, for multiple reasons. One, the user base changes as they use your device, and they especially change once you decide that the certain policy, like the user base tomorrow is different than the one. You know, if you do a study on 1,000 people and you roll it out to 100 million people, you're doing a different policy, and now you've also changed your user base.
But the remedy for that is randomizing better, right? Like the problem there is that it's not randomized enough.
No, it's randomizing more frequently. It's randomizing always. And then I don't know. There's just there's a reductio ad absurdum to it. But I think the reason why p-values are so popular is it gives software engineers a way to argue against the recalcitrant product managers, and also it kind of gives like product managers a way to avoid constantly having new features pushed. Like, you know, it's like, here's our standards, and like you can't. So it actually serves a regulatory mechanism there. It's not purely, A/B tests are not purely just like number go up in these companies.
But they can be used for number go up, especially if it's like A/B testing different marketing campaigns. And if the number goes up and you make more money with this campaign than that campaign, then people will do it more, right? Or like, are you saying that all companies are just dumb to A/B test? Because that seems like it's a too strong of a conclusion to draw. And
I think they A/B test more for these reasons of being able to have quantitative argumentation, and also to be able to say no. I really do think that that's the predominant reason, and I think there's a lot of good critique that's worth reading. I think you can either read Ronnie Kohavi has a bunch of interesting. I mean, he believes in A/B tests, but he has so much of his books and his papers are like, if you A/B test this way, you're gonna fool yourself. Most of Ronnie Kohavi's papers are about how most of the inferences from A/B tests are faulty. And there's a fantastic paper that, if you guys haven't read, it's one of my favorite papers on randomized experimentation, called on the impossibility of estimating the returns from advertising. which is exactly speaking to your point, Ben. It's like these things are actually really challenging to power properly and get the, you know, to really know that what you're seeing is what you want.
So I think I interrupted your answer. So the question I asked previously was about using statistics as a means of falsification versus using. And so sorry for derailing that.
No, that's all good. That's all good. This is like the Deborah Mayo position, and I really respect Deborah and think she's brilliant. And I don't think this is the thing. I don't think nobody's right. We could all have multiple truths that are kind of, see, I'm one of these guys. I'm like these multiple realists, you know. I think there's lots of truths that could be happening at once. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah, postmodern machine learning professor Benjamin Recht.
Anti-realist over here. I don't know how you do machine learning and don't become an anti-realist. I feel like it's very important. It's like, I don't know if you guys have ever read the new riddle of induction by Goodman. It's an obnoxious but very good analytical philosophy paper about how, you know, just patterns are everywhere. But I think as a machine learning researcher, it's just worth reading, because you're just like, oh yeah, shoot, what are we predicting? Anyway, sorry, let me not completely derail us though. I wanted to loop back to that just to really answer Vina's question about falsification. I think I am not a Popperian. And I feel like even with the statistics, you're gonna get in trouble.
Conversation over.
You're gonna get in trouble. I think that's one of the interesting parts about me reading Meehl is I just am not committed to the quantification in the way that he is. I think Meehl kind of gets in his own way with this kind of need for over quantification, and even at the end, he's less Popperian than he starts out. But I feel like he's still a little bit more than I'm willing to go.
In my notes, it was like, ask Ben what his problem with the Higgs boson is and with Popper. And so we talked a little bit about the Higgs boson.
Yeah, we could, let's close with Popper, because I think
exactly, that's perfect. That's great.
Popper. I think it's worth closing with Popper, and I like, again, don't get me wrong, man. Another brilliant person who I think we don't get to where we are in the philosophy of science without thinking through Popper. My issue is that there are plenty of people who just stop with Popper, and I just don't think a lot of it holds up. I think that it's just true that you can't ignore the social aspects of what we do as scientists and engineers, and those social parts create our practices of expertise, and they can do incredible things. I'm not denying like that there are shared realities that create these incredible artifacts. I mean, I'm an engineer, man. I feel like I feel more like culturally at home in engineering than in the sciences. And, I think there are like design principles that people settle on. And if you can get enough of them and you can kind of riff off of them together, you can build amazing technology. I just feel like the Popperian, like, I don't really understand how Popperian corroboration gets around induction. At the end of the day, we all have to do induction. I guess partially it's like I'm talking myself through it as therapy here. Like, I do machine learning. I believe in induction. I think it's like it definitely works. And I think trying to rebel too hard against it, I think, is what is where you start to get in trouble. So I think maybe let me just jump up one level. I don't think there's any possible way to do Popperian falsification once you look at the Duhem-Quine problem. And I know that people have tried to come up with like ways around Duhem-Quine, but I just don't see it being possible. And just in case your listeners don't know this issue, it's like you have a theory that predicts some outcome, but depends on, it's never just one statement. There's a huge set of clauses that have to hold in order for your experimental outcome to be true.
Background knowledge.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, knowledge about your instrument, knowledge about your, whether or not the experimental parameters were set correctly, knowledge about like the weather, knowledge about your star signs, whatever. Anyway, but there's all sorts of auxiliary theories that have to go in to produce some prediction. And when the prediction doesn't pan out, the problem with a logical conjunction is that any single one could be false. And how do you figure out which one?
Well, I think the solution to the Duhem-Quine is that you're never just testing one theory. You're comparing two theories such that the theories differ, but the background knowledge stays the same between the two.
I just don't think it's possible.
Well, this is the crucial test, right? Yeah,
severe test.
Yeah, Deutsch calls it crucial test. Popper maybe calls it severe test. But if you hold the background, I'm sure multiple thinkers have converged on the same idea. But if you hold all the background constant and you have two alternatives and only one can be true, then it's very difficult to be able to set up an experiment that way. But just to use the standard frickin' example that everybody uses, Newton and Einstein, right? They're both holding the background knowledge of the ship. And when you're shooting taking the photographs of the light. And so the two theories are different, but the background assumptions and stuff all are the same. And then that's how you
he threw out some of the photographs of the eclipse that didn't match So I mean, what happened there?
No, so we did a whole No. I have an answer for you. Yeah.
Okay.
So we did a whole podcast on this, which is, if I may use an analogy, I know we're winding down, but just because you hit my hobby horse, so I like this subject.
Go ahead.
So if I was to say to you that mathematics is all about proving stuff, and then you say, well, yes, that's obviously true, but there's the sociological level of having to convince a mathematician that the proof is true. And there's all it takes many, many, many years to convince somebody. And that's just talking about mathematics at two different levels, right? Both of which are true. So at the analogy in the scientific domain is that the goal is falsification, but then there is just the squishy, messy sociological part of having to convince people that the tests actually held. And so in a previous episode, we talked exactly about this, that it wasn't like as soon as the test was done, Eddington was right and everybody changed their mind. There was like 40 freaking years of having to convince people that the experiments held. They tried different things. They eventually did some measurements with GPS when the tools got better and all that. But this isn't negating Popper any more than saying that a proof requires discussion at a mathematics conference negates the idea that mathematics is about proving stuff. It's just adding in the messy real world details on top of kind of like the logical core.
But I'll just, with that example though, what's the better corroboration of special relativity? Like the trying to look at like the weird eccentricity of light in an eclipse, or building an atomic bomb?
But it's not corroborating, it's attempting to falsify and failing to falsify, right? And so the corroborating line is well that matters, right? Because
what convinces someone that special relativity is true more? Looking at all the details of the interferometry plates, or the destruction of 2 cities in Japan.
Yeah, the second one for sure.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the point, though, right?
I have. Okay, so I don't know when I'm going to finish this, and the answer is probably 20 years from now. But my goal, I want to write a philosophy engineering book that kind of grounds the philosophy of science and makes a case for how most science is simply a post hoc rationalization of technology, and that will be not today.
We're winding down, and you're saying all the controversial stuff at the end. This is great.
Not today, but I'll come back. When I get that done, I'll come back.
Yeah.
That's great.
This has been great. Yeah, we don't want to keep you anymore. This has been such a fun conversation, Ben. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. I'll just say I met Vaden parasocially when I started blogging. He was really encouraging. He sent me a great podcast from this podcast about super forecasting that was really helpful in my thinking. Set me down many of the paths I'm on now. So thank you guys. And, it was fun to chat with you.
We're waging similar battles.
He's actually responsible for your hate of Popper in some very disturbing way here.
Oh no!
No! In a very Popperian way. Criticize your masters. Criticize your teachers. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Thank you, Ben. This was great.
Yeah.